He is currently working as a guest professor of participatory approaches in the social and health sciences at Alice Salomon University in Applied Sciences, Berlin. He is the co-editor of the international volume with myself of the book we are launching today from Routledge. Robel has studied sociology and political science at Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia, and Cardiff University, Wales, UK, and social work in interdisciplinary research at the University of Kassel, Germany. Robel is also a founder and director of the network Intersectional Disability Justice. I'd also like to welcome my long-term colleague. Sharin and I have known each other for over 12 years. Dr. Sharin Shajahan Naomi, who is an experienced researcher, academic, social worker, and public speaker with multiple publications under her name. In 2024, Naomi will complete her postdoctoral fellowship with Create University in India and join the Independent University of Bangladesh as an assistant professor. Naomi has more than 10 years of research experience in the fields of law, human rights, gender, good governance, violence against women, Indigenous rights, disability, feminism, and anti-feminist backlash. I'd like to also introduce Alexis Padilla, who is a disabled lawyer, sociologist, theologian, and educator born and raised in the Global South. As a scholar and disability activist, Dr. Padilla pursues a blend of actionable ideas and interdisciplinary theories which aim to enhance intersectional disability justice and decolonial projects helpful to bridging global North and global South contexts through cross-coalitional movement building and emancipatory learning endeavours. And finally, I'd like to introduce the wonderful Lynn Rose, who joined the faculty at the American University in Suleimani, Iraq in 2016, following 20 years as a teacher scholar in the US and Germany. She serves as Professor of History and Disability Studies in the Social Sciences at AUIS. Her earlier scholarship focused on disability studies in the ancient Greco-Roman world. More recently, her interest has shifted to disability studies in the contemporary Global South. So please welcome Dr. Abay, Dr. Naomi, Padilla, and Rose in our talk today. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate and running with this book launch. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Cam. And I would also like to thank everyone, especially the contributors of this book from my side for this wonderful book being published today. And I'm showing the book now, just arrived 2 days ago. And I'm very also thankful for Khan, who has supported me in my very early career stage and co-editing this book, and was really challenging time for us. I'm going to talk about it in a while, and I'm very thankful that we have managed to have collected a lot of chapters which are very critical and very important all over the globe. So Tandem, next slide, please. Thank you so much. So the main aim of the book was providing a rich synthesis of empirical research and theoretical engagements with questions of disability across different practices of colonialism as historically defined post, anti, and settler colonialism. The book synthesizes, critiques, and expands the boundaries of existing disability research, which has been undertaken within different colonial contexts through the rich examination of recent empirical work mapping across disability and its intersectional colonialities. Filling an existing gap within the international literature through embedding the significance of disability for postcolonial, decolonial, and intersectional theories. This book has collected many chapters from the globe, from colleagues who has been working very critically on the topics of disability. Next slide, please. We would like also to dedicate this book to indigenous, enslaved, and colonialized people across the globe who have constantly, bravely, and unapologetically been fighting to preserve their dignity, land, sovereignty, language, and culture across time and generations. In the early stages of COVID pandemic, Karen and myself were engaged in discussion about co-editing a book, co-editing an international volume on intersectional disability. And we came across a lot of difficulties. On the one hand, it was due to the global pandemic, and it was difficult also to coordinate our meetings. On the other hand, I was also actually not able to visit Karen, which I have intended for half a year during my dissertation. But we have managed to collect a lot of chapters even throughout these difficulties. And our aim from the beginning was to bring together in collective dialogue a group of disability scholars that articulate disability diverse engagements, as disability is still, or theories and methods and literature on disability is still coined and developed in the global north, and that we want to also challenge and show best examples of critical theories on disability from the global south. Across their collective scholarship for many years, each of the authors of the book had also been developing a nuanced engagement with core scholarly questions that center disability relationality to colonialities of rule in which they or their work was located. So as editors and part of these discussions, Karen and myself decided to coin this dynamic geopolitical, historical, and social identifications, as well as socio-political categorization as intersectional colonialities. Next, please, and I will come back to this slide. Next slide, please, Tanya. Thanks. So our concept of intersectional colonialities focuses on contemporary anti-colonial battlegrounds in divergent geopolitical landscapes, while also situating contemporary movements, events, structures, and practices within continuities and historiographies of colonial regimes of rule and governance. So intersectional colonialities was for us layered beyond practices of identity and identity formation, collectivization, and solidarity. It entails also mapping embodied positionalities, identities, and social categories, and how this intersects with temporal relationalities and logics of colonial and the interviewing of history, the contemporary alongside its contingencies and regularities. Intersectionality, in a way, as demonstrated by each of the contributors within the book, opens the possibilities of critically engaging with core issues of disability as we emerge into new colonial landscapes and collective repertoires of resistance, contestation, and mobilization for global disability justice and solidarity. So we have selected 16 chapters. Next slide. Maybe the slide with the chapters. Thanks. So we have selected 16 chapters. Most of them are from the Global South. This was also important throughout the selection process for us. We have received a lot of chapter contribution. And among others, there was a chapter from Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia, Southern and Sub-Saharan Africa, Kurdistan, Iraq, UK, Canada, USA, Germany, and Central America. I am so happy that 3 of our amazing contributors will share some insight to their chapters today. And I will hand over to Tandap for that. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Robel, for that great overview of the book and our contributors. And it really was wonderful to work with you across that 4-year period. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Lynn Rose, Professor of History and Disability Studies from the American University of Iraq, Suleimani. Lynn, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to the book launch. I'm always happy to talk about disability studies in the context of Kurdistan, Iraq, both of which are often ignored. As this slide shows, I am with the American University of Iraq in Suleimani, serving as professor in the social sciences. People with disabilities are a substantial part of the Kurdistan, Iraq demographic. The World Health Organization, illustrated in this slide, estimated in 2021 that 15% of the world's population is disabled, and that 80% of people with disabilities live in low and middle income countries. And because of constant warfare, Iraq has an even higher percentage of people with disabilities. And you can see the Kurdish area of Iraq in purple on this map. Kurds are among the most numerous stateless people worldwide and the 4th largest ethnic group in the Middle East. Especially because of the lack of an official national identity, Kurdish identity and belonging is key to understanding the meaning of Kurdish disability. In their superb study of disability and rurality in the global south, if I could have the next slide, please, Kelly Johnson and Karen Soldatic, in the book pictured here, write that, quote, belonging is a complex concept involving an attachment to a place, relationships with others, a sense of safety, common values, and shared and or developing history. Belonging is also an internal sense of being at home in one's own body and mind. End quote. Kurdish existence hinges on belonging to an extended family, which determines one's primary identity and life course. For both people with disabilities and non-disabled people, the extended family network locks in a lifetime of security and locks out substantial interaction beyond the family. And the penalty for not belonging to a family is harsh. This defensive system, excuse me, also locks in traditional gender roles for which disabled girls and women, and some men, are often deemed unfit. One of our interviewees observed that for many disabled people in our country, their place is the house only. Kurdish identity depends and has always depended on the tribal system. In the system, the tribal or clan leaders are the heads of the clan to whom the entire clan swears allegiance. The family head is comparable to the Roman paterfamilias, a depiction of which we see on this slide, where the father reigns supreme in each extended family. I mentioned one of our interviewees. The interviewees here come from a research class in oral history. If I could have the next slide. My AUIS students conducted 21 semi-structured interviews with people whose impairments were physical, cognitive, psychiatric, sensory, speech, and combinations thereof. And the next slide, please. The medical model and the social model are good contextual tools to understand disability within the Kurdish family system, especially in terms of the caveats when using them as lenses for any given community in the global south. In the realm of the medical model, there are 2 categories of people, disabled and normal. Disabled people are broken, their disability is the problem. In the medical model, in other words, disability is caused by the impairment. In this slide, from the perspective of the medical model, the problem is that the child is confined to a wheelchair, thus can't get up the steps. It's too bad, and it's even a tragedy, and the child is to be pitied. In general, the lives of people with disabilities in Kurdistan, Iraq are shaped by this medical model in which the locus of the problem resides in individual disability. The medical model's mechanism is ableism, the belief that disabled people are worth less than non-disabled people. Ableism takes many forms, including architectural. Architectural ableism is expressed anywhere access is ignored, such as flights of stairs without the options of ramps. Could I have the next slide, please? This slide shows typical shops in the bazaar in Soleimani. Ms. Sham, when asked what was accessible, responded, nothing like that in Kurdistan. And the next slide. Here we see another view of the bazaar. In sad irony, shops selling accessibility products are themselves totally inaccessible. The alternative to the medical model with its institutionalized ableism is the social model. In this slide, if I could have the next one, from the perspective of the social model, there's nothing wrong with the child in the wheelchair. The problem is the architectural ableism of the stairs. An impairment, any sort of impairment, is disabling or not according to the cultural context. In a supportive environment, people with impairments are not disabled by barriers. Mr. Roche defines a supportive environment as, quote, providing an environment that does not prevent me to do anything I want. For example, when I go to a governmental agency that serves everyone in the country, I don't want to make anyone help me up the stairs. Instead, I want a path that I can easily go through with my wheelchair. The caveats in using the social model to understand the Global South are both important and enlightening. The concepts behind the social model were developed in the West and result from a disability rights movement steeped in notions of individual liberty, personal independence, and a responsive government. In addition, the social model assumes a rejection of elements such as charity. And the next slide. An important component of the social model is the independent living movement in the US, wherein disabled people gain the ability to live their own independent lives rather than being warehoused in nursing homes and other institutions. In Kurdistan, by contrast, with extremely few exceptions, anyone who requires care receives it within the extended family. This slide shows a typical Kurdish extended family, plus me, heading for a picnic. There is very little warehousing of people, next to no homelessness, and it is rare for anyone, disabled or non-disabled, to do anything but transfer from the natal family to the marital family. Belonging to an extended family is a key element to being Kurdish. The security of belonging can be a buffer against hardships such as poverty, war, and rival families. But traditional Kurdish family roles have narrow parameters, and the family structure does not allow for much variation in thought or expression. Ms. Hanar observes that, quote, due to the collective society we live in, I mean, Iraq is a pretty collectivist society, people act like each other. They're all similar. They have the same tradition, the same habits, the same everything. And the next slide. Another assumption behind the Western construct is that of a receptive dynamic government. In Kurdistan's extended family and tribal system, government forces resemble the ultimate paterfamilias, albeit a dysfunctional father, in this era of crisis management and instability. People who are deemed sufficiently disabled by a panel of medical experts receive a government pension, about $100 monthly, US dollars monthly, although many months the distribution is canceled altogether. Ms. Luna says, I could barely live and buy my medicine with this amount. The recipients are expected to appreciate these measly and sporadic offerings from the government. As seen here, this woman accepts her inadequate stipend humbly and gratefully. And the next slide. People with disabilities have staged organized protests, as seen in this slide of a sit-in to protest not receiving their pensions. But the result is the same as it is for any protest. The government agents say they will look into the matter and fix everything, and then they don't. And the next slide. In the absence of government support, charity keeps people alive. The medical model is sometimes called the charity model because charity in the West intermingles with pity and consumerism, which, as Dan Goodley and Leslie Swartz point out in their chapter in this groundbreaking collection pictured here, reflects an emphasis on understanding disability through labor and capitalism. This universalist approach to disability, they argue, is not useful. And the next slide. Charity in Kurdistan is a feature of Islamic society. Indeed, charity is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and giving aid to disabled people is laudable and respectable, prompting lavish social media praise by disability activists for private donors, while also providing a platform in which to critique the government for its failure to serve the basic needs of its disabled citizens, as seen here in this typical Facebook post. And the next slide. I will end on a hopeful note. Many disabled people here have resisted internalizing stigma, pity, and paternalism. Ms. Tara tells us, life means my disability. It is beautiful, and it is my fate. Disability advocacy organizations, founded and run by disabled people in Kurdistan, work to educate their communities. Recently, the directors of 7 organizations for disability advocacy in Suleimani, 6 of them themselves disabled, came together as a coalition to raise awareness and pressure the government. And the next slide, which is the last one. Finally, while in its earliest infancy, disability studies is making its way into some curricula. Here we see a group of sign language teachers and advocates speaking to an Introduction to Disability Studies class at AUIS. People with disabilities and their allies can affect change. We have seen this throughout the activism of the 20th and 21st century. I will close with the words of Mr. Rabaz, who says, some people are sitting at home right now and they can reprogram the whole system in this country. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn. That was a great overview of your chapter and really important work. I'd now like to introduce Alexis Padilla, who will provide us with also a great overview of his work. Over to you, Alexis.
Thank you so much, Karen, and all of you who are watching this. Let me turn on my video.
Over to you, Alexis. The slide is up from
Right.
the poem.
Yeah, I was trying to turn on my video, but it sounds like I cannot get to that point. So I will just speak without my video. I also wanted to mention that in my chapter, I had 4 endnotes, and we went through these interesting process. At first, there was 1 endnote that was blank. Now 3 of the 4 ended up in the published version being blank. So one of these endnotes contains what you guys are seeing, the English translation of Poema de Amor, which is a poem by Roque Dalton, a Salvadoran progressive poet who was assassinated in the 1970s in El Salvador. And his family has allowed me to include the poem into my chapter, and I think it's a very poignant way to open the conversation around this idea that I call translatinidades, namely the uniqueness of not just the geographical makeup of El Salvador as a country, as a society, but also about the ethos of being Salvadoran and being suspected of everything, as the poem says at some point. The first line of the poem says that those who widened the Panama Channel, and to me, that line already tells us about disablement, because the number of people who died or were disabled in the process of widening the Panama Canal is undetermined, but everybody knows that these large works tend to be very disabling for those who work in this. And it says that they work under the silver roll, not the gold roll, meaning that they were underpaid compared to other workers in this system. It was a navigation system that was set up by the United States as part of the imperialist endeavors of the time. In fact, Panama as a country exists separately from Colombia because it was part of Colombia before, just to facilitate the control of the American empire over that region and the global outreach of this process. So in my chapter, I try to combine this notion of translatinidades, the unique realities of each of the Latin American societies in the global South, with regards to what I call inter-imperialism. One thing that strikes me is that when people think of Latin America, they tend to think in singular and not in plural, when in fact there are many ways of being Latins, both in each of these countries and also in the experience of people who come to the global North to live, to work, to study, whatever they come to do here in the global North. So inter-imperialism for me is a way to understand that there are many kinds of imperialisms, and looking at the various layers of imperialism with the different modalities that each of the colonizing countries imposes is a way for us to understand not only domination, but also to look at the cracks of what could be cross-coalitional approaches to be engaged in counter-hegemonic connections among different types of subaltern groups, disabled groups, racialized, gendered groups, different types of subgroups that have kept, they've been kept isolated from one another. So approaching the understanding of Salvadorans from a transnational perspective, not just thinking of them as circumscribed to El Salvador, but thinking of them as networks that cut across their enclaves here in the United States, or you know, if I know some of them have been moving towards Canada. Vancouver has a good large population of Central American folks. So we can see disabilities through a very different lens. And that's what I tried to do in my chapter by connecting these various notions, translatinidades and inter-imperialism, are framed in my chapter through a notion that I developed when I was writing my second dissertation is the idea of, the word I use is lat-discrete. Lat-discrete combines two bodies of literature. One of them is latcrit, which was part of critical legal studies that emphasize the realities of Latin American, what they call Latinx peoples in the United States. And then discrete was a framework that tried to incorporate critical race theory in connection to critical disability studies, again, within the context of educational institutions in the United States. So one of the things that I wanted to do by developing lat-discrete was to take it beyond global North perspectives. And I tried to emphasize a transnational view that looks at Latin American people in the Latin American continent, but also in terms of their unique differential, both racialized and geographical aspects that create their identities. So I do invite readers to engage with the chapter from their different perspectives. But some of the readers may be Guatemalans or maybe Nicaraguans. I think each of those particular geographical societies experience disability and racialized components very differently. And in my view, I think there is a tremendous amount of learning that can be obtained by approaching translatinidades in the way I did. I'm originally from Venezuela. I'm from South America. My understanding of disability in those contexts is quite different to what I have learned in conjunction to Central Americans, especially Central Americans here in the United States. So I think it's a valuable way to connect with this these contexts and to look at transnationally how disability and other subaltern categories can connect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alexis. And I'm really sorry to hear about those footnotes. I'm not sure what's going on with that. As you recall, we did have quite a few issues with the publication process, but I thought we had ironed those out. I think we'll have to chase that up, Robel. I'll get onto it. Next we have Sharin, over to you, and really offering a different dynamic about thinking about disability and gender in the Global South.
Thank you, Karen. It's good to see you after such a long time. And hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I am Sharin from Bangladesh. I am really happy to contribute a chapter in this book to give the scenario of Bangladesh, that how mothers of autistic children in Bangladesh are coping with difficulties, which is arising from a structure, patriarchal and neoliberal structure. And the chapter name is Raising Children with Autism in a Patriarchal Society of a Neoliberal State, Experience of Mothers of Autistic Children in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is very much committed to progress economically, and that's why it has a very aggressive economic culture. It embodies a very fast neoliberal economic spirit. So when we look at neoliberal economic spirit, we find that it creates a concept of citizenship where able-bodied, self-sufficient citizens are considered to be ideal self, and anyone who doesn't fit into this category are considered to be burden. So definitely children with autism are considered to be a burden in this economic framework. So after that, it is a patriarchal society where gender division of labor exists. As a result, when neoliberal economic culture is conjoined with patriarchal culture, women become a victim of shaming, blaming, gender division of labor, and a huge responsibility without any state support. My research found that it is not only the shame and guilt of the mothers that make their life extremely inconvenient, but also lack of state support, I would say adequate support, is also responsible for making their life extremely inconvenient. In a patriarchal society like Bangladesh, when a child with autism is born, it is considered to be a sin of mother, that she has done something as a result. God has punished her. In my interview, I have found very weird type of justification that in-laws and community are telling mother when they had children with autism, such as you didn't take consent of the parents when you got married, you were very much careeristic when you are pregnant, you didn't pray well when you are pregnant, as a result, the child has some abnormalities. Secondly, it took a long time for them to diagnose the child with autism because there is not enough knowledge or awareness on autistic children. I have gone through also a social media research to find out the pattern that how mothers are facing and what they think about these difficulties. What I have found that there are many public posts which are talking about that how they are not understanding that whether their children is autistic or not. And there is no doctor where they could go to ask this. There is a government hospital, but often mothers in the interview, they have said that it is very inconvenient. It is extremely time consuming to go there and wait for the doctor, and often they are not satisfied with the service. The public post in the Facebook, they have often asked, I have a 2-year-old child or 3-year-old child. They are not making eye contact with me. Do you think that he or she is autistic? And there are comments after comments that, yes, I think he or she is, or there is a sharing of the experience that my child was like that. This is a very common scenario that mother goes through, that 1 or 2 years. Sometimes the doctor even cannot, diagnose them properly. Lack of knowledge, lack of appropriate medical service is a big issue. Secondly, when the child is diagnosed with a autism, mother is given a sense of, feelings of that you have done something, a sin. That's why your child is a autistic, or we don't have anyone in the family. How come he or she is an autistic child? So at some point, mother also internalized this sin. That she also starts to believe that, yes, I have done something. As a result, my child has become like this. This is a very important part, and this can be questioned that why there is no mental health support for them. It is true that there is a lack of mental health, appropriate mental health support for them, and sometimes they also feel hesitant to go to mental health support because when they go there, they don't find satisfaction. It doesn't help them. I want to read out a mother's statement, which she shared in a public post on Facebook, that how they internalize the shame and guilt. You know what is the problem? No matter how much we say that autism is not a product of sin, we believe it. So she is telling that she has internalized the thing that, because of her sin, a child is born as autistic. A disabled person is accepted by no one in this country. Those who work with autism and those who have children with autism know how much mental trauma they face. People express empathy in front of us, but behind the back, they might say something like, a child become autistic because his or her parents are bad people, All faults belong to parents. However, fathers do not have faults. It is mother who has the fault. People think that if a mother is a good woman, her child cannot have autism. So this is the social, cultural, and psychological setup of mothers when they have a child of autism. Second comes their issues of affordability and access to medical service. Most of the mothers leave their job to take care of the child because from a patriarchal society's expectation, a mother is the primary caregiver for the child. So as a result, she feels that she has to leave the job when a child is diagnosed with autism, and there is no institutionalized caregiving practice in Bangladesh, and it is very difficult to get professional caregiver who is up to the standard. That's what the interview said. So most of them prefer to leave their job. As a result, there is always a financial tension in the family. Husband becomes the only breadwinner. So that creates more tension. Secondly, these women, they say that of course there is a government hospital, but we don't prefer to go there. We want to, go to the private hospitals, and they are also not satisfied with these private hospitals and private schools. When I went through the post of the mother, what I have found that some mothers have decided to take away their children from the private school, saying that we can't just afford it, and he or she is not improving. Why he or she is not improving? That is hunting the mother, because the new liberal culture has given them an idea that, you are bringing your children to this private hospital and therapy because we will ensure that your children will improve, and at some point they will behave like an able-bodied person. So the high expectation that he or she has to improve is also making mother more insane, that is coming from a new liberal culture. I would like to, finish with a positive note that in recent years, parents of children with autism have come forward to share their grief-stricken experience on social media, especially mothers. They're openly sharing what is happening, where to find good therapists, what type of difficulties they're facing, why they need a care infrastructure. And a number of government and non-government NGOs have joined in raising awareness. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh has shown personal interest to create inclusive society for children with autism and remove stigma around this condition. Media has also given coverage to the issue of children with autism. Also, although late, discussion on how mothers of children with autism face stigma and lack family support has taken a small space in public forums. Understanding that mothers' experience of caring for children with autism is of utmost importance for improving state support and developing infrastructure and awareness that are urgently needed in Bangladesh. So my chapter also has some narrative of the mothers and some snippets from social media research of their public post. If you want to go through it, you would find that what type of difficulties they're facing and how they are defining their experience. And that shows that, we need to actually value women's experience from their perspective and the pros and cons of it to understand the intensity of the difficulties that the patriarchy and neoliberalism are creating by creating an alliance in a country like Bangladesh. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sharon. It was a great overview of your chapter. And a really important dynamic around thinking through the gendering of disability in the Global South. Robel, would you like to now open the floor for questions? So those of you who have questions, can you please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and Robel will be facilitating this process.
Yes, thank you so much, Sharon. Alexis and Lynn. So I'm really excited to hear some more questions from the audience. So yeah, feel free to raise your questions. Yeah, there are only some appreciations for the contributors. Nicole, you want to, is it actually possible to just speak out? Because we are a small group, maybe it's also possible if you could just speak. I see Nicole Konopka. No? Yes.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if I can turn my camera on, but yeah. So anyway, I don't think I can, but so you can see my sea lion picture. But thank you so much for all the contributors. And I was wondering, I have actually two questions. To what extent does age factor into your individual researches? So the three speakers that we heard, but also the two editors of the book. And the second question, which I'm personally more interested in as an instructor here in Germany at Bamberg University in Bavaria, what were the biggest challenges that you as contributors faced in terms of your daily engagement with that topic while you were writing your papers, while you were doing your research for your individual projects? So I don't know if those questions are too big, but I'm just a terribly curious person. So thank you for listening, and thank you for organizing this wonderful evening. Well, for me, it's evening here in Germany, and the best of luck to you and your book. Thank you.
Nicole, is it okay if I go first?
Please, thank you, Nicole.
I'm very interested in this question about aging because what I see in the case of Salvadorans is two extreme elements when it comes to age. Children with disabilities who are from El Salvador, they experience discriminatory practices. I do disability advocacy in the context of what they call individualized education planning or education programs for children with disabilities. And I've seen how, for example, things where they need to send the mothers or the parents materials in Spanish, they don't do that. I have a colleague who told me that he, as a Salvadoran, grew up here, and he was never allowed to be present in his own IEPs. So these discriminatory practices amount to symbolic violence, the certainty that you don't belong. And then you have the other extreme of aging grandparents that end up coming. Some of them came to work and they get disabled in farm working. So they become a quote unquote burden for their families. And depending on the circumstances, they may not even be eligible to a lot of the basic medical support as they age. So you have transnational situations where the family is helping some of their family members in El Salvador, and at the same time, they're taking care of aging people with disabilities that probably got disabled as they were working in this country. So you think there are extreme situations that show how transnational conditions relate to aging and disability in an intersectional fashion. I don't think I have too much to say about the challenges. When we started writing these chapters, we were sort of coming out of the pandemic, and I think overall we were all sort of, and I think Robel mentioned some of that at the beginning. It was a weird time to do anything, and I found it encouraging to be engaged in this and other projects as a way to keep my head of the water and be less worried about what could have been a much more depressing time. So it's I have sort of a love and hate relationship to that timing and that sort of things.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Maybe I would also ask, oh, okay, Lynn, would you like to add something on that?
Lynn?
What? Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's a
I
good
would
question.
just respond. Dr. Nicole, thank you for your question. Just as far as the factor of aging, I find the generational difference really important. Oldish or older people have a different mindset about disability. And I think younger people have a more flexible perspective about it. And of course, that affects everything, including internalized ableism. As far as the challenges, yeah, it was COVID. It wasn't so much a challenge for me, but my students who conducted the interviews had to do them all online. And that was too bad, but they did a great job anyway. Thanks again for your questions.
Thanks, Lynn. Sharon, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was to make the mothers open up about their very intimate details. So which made me, more vulnerable and understand that how to make connection with women, sometimes ignoring my researcher's ego, or I know the best, this type of ego. And I felt that how much the feminist research methodology is required when we do research on this sensitive topic.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, I think for me, it was also very interesting as Alexis started also answering the question that there is also a different manifestations of ableism or structural ableism throughout aging and age, because when we see like disabled children in school, they might experience different forms of ableism, but at the same time, and I totally agree with Lynn, they could also develop a new forms of interaction with on disability and experience of disability. Like for instance, I think it would be very difficult to speak of disability pride if you are still living in poverty and intersectional forms of structural oppression due to disability, gender, and other forms of discrimination. And at the same time, I think change is also very challenging for many people, but also for dominant societies. So it could be also, it also shows how disability could be also fluid throughout different stages of life or lifespan. So I think it was also very interesting as the question comes. Okay, I will ask again the other person in the room. Do you like to raise a question, or do you have some comments on the book or on the presentation?
This is Tandy. So there are a couple questions in the Q&A, so I will just ask them, and then all the panelists can please chime up and answer them.
Thanks, Tandy.
Yeah. So Motion asks how you see participation of disabled people in higher education and university teaching.
Thank you, Dr. Mohsin. If I could start with that one. There's prevalent, widespread, institutionalized academic ableism here in Kurdistan. And people with disabilities are prevented from higher education in many ways, including sometimes the most basic access. But it starts in the primary system where, for example, deaf children generally drop out of school by 2nd or 3rd grade because there's really no sign language interpretation for them. I could go on, but in summary, academic ableism in higher education is real. And yeah, I don't know where it will start to change, but maybe in the primary schools. Thank you for the question.
I'm thinking of, I don't know how much the audience knows about the phenomenon of quote unquote dreamers. Here in the United States is an initiative that was trying to allow a path to citizenship for undocumented children who were born in, say, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, and they were brought here very small, 2, 3, and so all they knew was United States. And it's the path to citizenship in the United States is a very close pathway for most immigrants. So one of the books that I worked with was written by undocumented higher education folks with disabilities, and they wrote this book. Some of them didn't have disabilities, but some of them were engaged in this idea. The book is called We're Not Dreamers. And they actually try to interrogate the whole idea of dreamers, even the connotations of quote unquote the American dream and using the dreamer notion. You can see that it's essentially a political tool to try to fake inclusion. Well, in fact, it's quite difficult for undocumented folks with disabilities, and documented ones as well. But in that particular case, you can see a very unique intersectional way in which disability plays out with Salvadoran or other nationalities to prevent access to education. At the same time, the government was trying to fake this illusion that they could dream for whatever, and that you know that sort of trickery of creating a fiction out of that situation.
Thank you. So our next question is from Dagmar. It's a two-part question. So they ask if each of the speakers can tell one most inspirational and moving story from their field work, and was there one particular story that changed how you as a scholar thought about your topic?
I can take that. The students who conducted the interviews really reminded me how important disability studies is, how powerful it is as a tool of humanity. In the follow-up or evaluation section, one of the students who had conducted a pretty in-depth interview said, "I am a changed person." And yeah, that was very moving for me to know that disability studies had entered his life and shifted his perspective. I think that's the best thing that can happen to students of disability studies. Thanks for the question.
For me, one of these endnotes that disappeared, I was acknowledging the entry point and all the connection to the literature with respect to El Salvador from a Salvadoran professor of English at the University of Arizona, Marisa Cárdenas, and she was very much instrumental and inspirational for me to see both differences and similarities as a Latinx person coming from a different country and experiencing the transnational connections of inter-imperialism. I think it was inspirational for me to see the points in which we can build cross-coalitional connections among Latin American folks with different trajectories, and at the same time use the transnational links that we have that are so different to connect with other subaltern groups. So for me, that was almost an epiphany in some ways, because I know that it's easy to put all people from a region, the Pan-African groups or the Pan-Asian groups into a bag and avoid really looking at the uniqueness of each of the place-based trajectories that people bring with them. And I think playing with that richness is very important.
The next question comes from Danielle. Danielle says, you mentioned some of the struggles with working on this book through the pandemic. Did this experience shape any of the writing or projects that are featured here? Thanks to all the presenters, and she looks forward to reading it.
So I guess I mentioned that the students did the interviews online. Beyond that, it's kind of interesting. In Suleimani, there was a little bit of lockdown, but mostly we sort of ignored the pandemic. So no, my own experiences didn't really shape the product, just because things were so different here than I think from the rest of the world. But maybe some of the other authors had different experiences with it in places that paid a little more attention to the pandemic.
I'm reading the book right now, and Robel, you can correct me, but I read the chapter that you co-authored with Urbana Aravels. I read it as part of this issue of violence where disability intersects with other categories, racialized, gendered aspects that condemn people toward much more violence. And I think the statistics all over the world show how people with disabilities who happen to be racialized members of racialized groups tended to be more likely to be disregarded in terms of medical services, which is of course a form of violence. I think the way I read that chapter is through the prism of the pandemic and how the pandemic epitomized intersectionality in intersectional disability matters with respect to all sorts of forms of violence that were overt in most of the countries, and they were based on issues of ableism combined with all sorts of interlocking oppression matrices.
Thanks, Alexis. I think I would like to add one more thing that's very similar to the topic that you have raised. I think in the chapter with Nimra, but also while we were co-editing this book, or at least discussing the theories, we of course already know how colonialism affects the global production of disability. I think that was already theorized, but at the same time during the pandemic, maybe one thing I have learned was a shift in theories, for instance, from Yaspi Pua, how actually wars and international conflicts, but also the dominance of Western governance, colonial governance, has affected the lives of people with disabilities in the global South. I think this has been really amplified during the corona pandemic. I think we have seen how the global South was pitted and shamed and excluded even from the basic access to medication, to basic access to everyday life as well. I think it was also part of this production of disability, but at the same time amplifying the very restrictive structures to support structures, and how we also somehow, I think that's also what Sharon in a way was coining with or discussing with the neoliberal structures, how during the pandemic capitalist ideas have been also profiting from the pandemic in a way. So we could see also intersectional colonialities in a way that the global north was also affected differently than the global south. And then when we see how these structures of oppressions are functioning intersectionally, I think that has also shifted a bit, even though we know like a lot of theories from Khan Soldatich and from Yaspi Pua and many other people I know or have read, but at the same time, there were also new forms of intersectional discrimination in this time. I think that has also shifted a bit how to understand colonialities or colonial continuities. Yeah, I would like maybe to ask Sharon if you want to also share something about your observations throughout the pandemic?
Yes, I mean, working in a pandemic is a big issue. Also, some of the interviewees discussed that during pandemic, how they have also suffered a lot. Their children have become more addicted to mobile, and sometimes housemates were not there, so their burdens became double. And that created more stress for them. And so it intensified their suffering. And with the autistic children, without the help of appropriate help from the structure, patriarchal and neoliberal structure. So the financial burden also increased.
The next question comes from Max, and they ask, how have intersectional colonialities shifted in a post-pandemic? What about queerness and disability in the global South?
Well, just quickly speaking for Kurdistan, Iraq, and Iraq, there was a law passed recently that we can't say homosexual or gay, we have to say deviant. And I think that says it all.
I see two trends that example, and even some European countries have the case of Georgia, for instance, and that are coming up with these very overt anti-queer positions. But I think what has also occurred after the pandemics, precisely because the pandemic unmasked a lot of the oppressions, is a much more galvanized, open understanding of intersectional colonialities and the need to fight at the level of climate change, at the level of other intersectional dimensions. So I think I want to be hopeful. I think the COVID pandemic was a wake-up call that unified subaltern groups in ways that all the repression wasn't able to suppress. And so I think in part the backlash we're seeing in some of these countries is a response to that tendency of being much more open to resisting things that probably were not resisted before, like some of the things that are happening with female clothing patterns and things that we saw right after the pandemic times. I think some of those reactions are part of legacy of pandemic times. So we have these two forces crashing in ways that are unique, and it's possible, I think, to tip the process towards a much more subaltern-based kind of approach. But again, this will probably take decades. But I think it's a crucial moment of crossroads for those struggles.
Thank you. Our next question is for Professor Lynn from Farman. They asked, do you think the war in Iraq has produced more impairments, and how do you see the issue in the local and global context?
Yeah, the constant warfare, of course, has produced impairments, physical, psychological, and other, and also generational intergenerational impairments. And even though there's no war right now, the effects from the war, for example, the landmines haven't been cleared, and those who are clearing them will often end up disabled. And as far as the global context, I would hope anyway that invisible and social psychological disability becomes more accepted and spoken of as disability. PTSD here, for example, isn't so much seen as disability, and yet it's so extremely prevalent. So I hope that leads to more awareness. Thanks for the question.
Thank you everyone for your questions. We're going to wrap up the Q&A and pass it over to Karen for some closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Robel and our panel, for joining us today, and really just staying with the process with this book that took us basically a long 4-year period. We really appreciate you staying with us, and actually we also want to apologize for those errors. Alexis, I haven't received my book as yet, but we will get on to the publisher. And it just shows how inaccessible platforms where people have no control over their publication outputs in that process, and I deeply apologize, and we'll try to get that rectified. We've got one of the things that we wanted to announce is we've just launched our International Visiting Fellows for 2025. So we're seeking applications for one international visiting fellow for a period of up to 6 weeks, and one member from the global civil society. And the full application and guidelines are available here on the website under opportunities, or feel free to email us at research.circ.hecw@torontomu.ca. If you're interested in joining us in 2025 as part of either a sabbatical for those of you who work in academia, or as part of a research sabbatical for those of you working in civil society that are interested in looking at some of these issues and getting support from us to come and be with us for 6 weeks with a stipend for that period. So reach out, the guidelines are there. We also have opportunities to join us as either adjunct or affiliate fellows for those whose work aligns with the work of the CERC. We will have further appointments coming up. We will be soon also advertising a senior research associate, really working in the area of data science and quantitative research methodologies. And we'll also be having a local Ontario, Toronto urban community visiting fellows program being launched locally as well. So look out for those opportunities. But right now, at the moment, closing date in July, end of July, and the full details for the applications. And that's basically $10,000 in total, with $8,000 for up to 6 weeks here as a living stipend and a contribution to either international airfares or fieldwork, depending on which one. to come and work with us and develop your research further in partnership with the CERC. So thanks so much. Our next event is another book launch led by Dr. John Ward. This is a global collection from Indigenous scholars throughout the world. Dr. John Ward is based here in Turtle Island, otherwise known as Canada, under settler colonial systems of national governance. And this will be a hybrid event in July. I know it says Thursday, June 11. It should say Thursday, July 11. From 1:30 to 6, what we'll be having is the panel from 1:30 to 3, and then we'll be having a smaller space for some discussion and dialogue and meal in the afternoon. So please join us if you're here, and please make sure you register with the CERC team for either online or face-to-face. Thank you so much, Lynn, Alexis, Sharon, and Robel. It's been a long journey, quite a difficult journey given the circumstances in which we found ourselves developing this book. And really, thank you ever so much for your patience and staying with us. It's really lovely to have you all online. Thank you. Now I'd like to close.
Thank you for you, Khan, and everyone for attending
Robel.
today, contributing.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Have a nice day or evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.